You know, I was supposed to talk about Sukkot, right? We're still in the midst of Sukkot, and Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu, this time of rejoicing. And then we talk about the Sukkah, and we talk about life and the journeys, because the Sukkot were kind of built and constructed, these flimsy structures, on our way out of Egypt toward the Promised Land. And I love Sukkot, because the Torah about Sukkot means live your life, and this little sukkah, this hut, this booth isn't going to protect you from everything. It provides just a little bit of shelter. And that's life. Not everything is going to be able to protect us all the time. Otherwise, we're never going to leave these big cement walls, and that's not living a life. You have to go out and journey. So I love the Torah behind it, and I wanted to talk about embracing life and celebrating. But I have to tell you, this week I feel so challenged, and I feel kind of pushed down a little bit. And one of the senators this morning, after hearing the testimony of Dr. Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh the other day, he made a really harsh critique, and it stuck with me all day today. He said before this proposal from Senator Flake, a proposal that's a compromise of sorts, and he said that there are those people who don't want to hear women's voices. And that really resonated with me this morning. I know that's true, and it's always been kind of intellectual. But to kind of see it this way so clearly, and to kind of see it and kind of flash back to a previous nomination process with Anita Hill, I was younger, and I didn't appreciate all of it. I saw an injustice, but I didn't understand a societal issue because nobody really taught me. Nobody really taught me. It wasn't said so often. I didn't take a women's studies class in college. I didn't understand patriarchy. There are questions that I just didn't understand, and I think a lot of men don't and haven't and didn't. And when we confront that, there's a lot of men who become defensive because we don't like not knowing something. And a lot of men become defensive because we can consider ourselves people who believe in equality and see all of these advances, but because we don't necessarily get it, we miss some of the nuances about larger ways of women experiencing things in our society that we never really have to confront personally, and a lot of people just don't talk about it. And it made sense again because there was another senator from the other side of the aisle who, in a mocking kind of a way, began his statement by saying that he was a single white male and kind of celebrating that a little bit, and I found that to be mocking. That it was a challenge to people that don't really understand what patriarchy looks like and feels like. And so he kind of puts it out there as something that's not so serious, and people are critiquing as if he should be defensive. And again, I'm reminded how there's a lack of understanding because for too long, there hasn't been enough conversations in public spaces like sermons. We only encounter it if we go looking for it or if we have a good teacher, whomever that might be. So one of the things about Sukkot, and I mentioned it on Yom Kippur, if you were still awake that day, it was a long day, that the rabbis noticed that when the gates are closing at the end of the Nila service, they created an extension through the end of Sukkot because they wanted everybody to get through those gates of repentance. They extended this time of being able to be written in that book, the metaphor of it, all the way through the end of Sukkot. Well, we're almost at the end of Sukkot, so I have to say, for the sin we have done before you, God, for not getting it, for not really listening, for not growing our sense of compassion and empathy strong enough to understand, and for not being willing to truly listen without putting in our own 2 cents. Because, guys, we often don't get it. I've noticed throughout the years how many men, including rabbis, get into debates, and I wonder why they're talking over other women. Why can't they insert themselves into the conversation? It's not like they're not trying. And I didn't necessarily realize how prevalent of a practice that is everywhere. And I'm looking out in my congregation right now, and I'm seeing a lot of women saying, duh. Like, seriously, Green, now. I saw it, I noticed it, but I didn't say anything about it. I've seen and heard comments to my colleagues who are women and how it stings when they hear, you don't look like a rabbi. You're too cute to be a rabbi. And how that diminishes their integrity. And we even see some of the critiques of why Dr. Blasey Ford was a credible witness was because she was polite and she perhaps was considered attractive, and so she was able to be heard differently, and how that becomes a comment. That is part of our society. We have to talk about this more. So this is a difficult sermon for some of you to hear because some of you, have been victims of sexual assaults. You have been victims of sexual misconduct or not being heard. This also might be difficult for you because there might have been a time in your past where you have acted intentionally or unintentionally in a way that has hurt others and have harassed other women and have participated in that misconduct and now have a sense of remorse. Either way, this is a difficult sermon, and it's a difficult one for me to give. I want to be sensitive. I certainly acknowledge that there are many men who experience sexual harassment and assault themselves by male and female perpetrators, but in the words of my colleague, Jill Maderer, a rabbi in Philadelphia, she said it's the misconduct against women that is the epidemic. It's an epidemic. And only now are men trying to be a little bit more of an ally who are speaking less, except when they're giving sermons, and listening more. And I think that's something we need to teach, because sexual harassment and assault are not about sex. We all know that. It's about power. And in our country and in our society and in our communities, there's a trend where women have less power. And so feeling disempowered and having a sense that no one will believe me, or that I'm supposed to know better, and there's a sense of shame and hurt that comes with that sense of being disempowered, many keep secrets because of the shame and the stigma that stifle them. It's kind of fascinating to me about the community of Facebook. And Facebook brings many challenges, but it also brings some extraordinary gifts. And some of those gifts are having a sense of community. Not everybody understands that, but there is a sense of community online where people feel empowered by seeing other people's stories. And maybe it's easier to put it out there when nobody's in front of me. I can just type it and hit return, and it's out. And people feel empowered to say, I've never told this. I'm seeing it from my colleagues. My friends, 40 years later, are sharing an experience that they've never mentioned out loud. And we know from researchers there are many women who don't speak up. and nor do the bystanders who are around them when they're experiencing devaluing comments after harassment or misconduct. And it's not only women, it's men too. We're both quiet. We turn away. We pretend we didn't hear. We pretend we didn't see. For the sin we have committed against you, for closing our eyes. And after Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony the other day, the National Sexual Assault Hotline had an increase on calls in one day of 201%. In one day, just Thursday, that was the increase of calls to the national hotline, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, a 201 increase in calls. So I think on some level, she has given a gift at a tremendous cost to herself, on display for the world, not necessarily by her choice, but to give power. I want to share something from my colleague, Jill Maderer. Again, this rabbi in Philadelphia. She said in the Torah story of Babel, right, the building of the Tower of Babel and everybody speaking those different languages, the people of the city endeavored to build a tower with its top in the sky in order to make a name for themselves. But God takes it down, saying, if this is how they have begun to act, then nothing they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Nothing out of their reach. God was concerned with unchecked power. And when God sees unchecked power, God dismantles it. The tower came down. We're supposed to act like God. We're supposed to be godly. When we see unchecked power, we are supposed to dismantle it. When a woman tells you she has been harassed, believe her. Believe her. When you start a conversation with a woman, notice how easy it is to default to a comment about one's looks. Resist the temptation. Women are judged by and get so many comments on their looks that it devalues their work and other contributions. If you see a person touch someone who looks uncomfortable with it, say something. If a woman has earned a title and you in her professional setting and in a professional situation, address her using that title. When you hear a sexist joke that's not funny, we're supposed to respond, "You're better than that." Let's not say that. If you hear your dentist refer to the hygienist as the girls, please speak about professional adult females in your office as women. Lead with an understanding that no arena achieves its potential until different kinds of people are represented. Not the boardroom, the Senate, or the synagogue, so pursue diversity in leadership cultivation, hiring and professional mentoring pipelines, and bring anti-bias training to the places where you lead. I think that's all important things that Rabbi Maderer shared. And it reminds me of a text from the Talmud, simple. It was in the context of somebody profaning God's name, and it says in the Gemara, it says, anyone who has the capability to protest effectively the sinful conduct of another and does not protest is punished for that person's sins. We take it on as if we did it ourselves. If you have the ability to protest, we must. Now, we have to do so respectfully. We can't humiliate the other. People are forgetting that right now. We can be good teachers, and we also have to be good listeners. I want to share one other thing. There's a text in the Bible that nobody wants to talk about out loud. Nobody really wants to talk about it. I've never taught this text. It's too hard. It's terrible. But in the book of Judges, in chapter 19, there's a scenario of this terrible rape scene. It's terrible. And in the context of this text, it's supposed to say how the Israelites have lost their way, and there's chaos, and there's depravity, and there's all of these terrible things that are happening. And at the very, very end of the text, it says, as a result of this chaos and this terrible scene, there's an instruction to consider, take counsel, and speak up. One feminist scholar, Phyllis Tribble, she says, strikingly, the first command is actually a Hebrew idiom of direct your heart, followed by the phrase to her. Direct your heart to her, meaning the victim. But all of our translations take the sense of the idiom out, and instead they say, consider it. Put your mind to this. It could be more casual of take note to it. And they remove the sense of the idiom, which is direct your heart to her. The imagery of the heart and the object of the sentence, her, are removed. Even in the translation of sacred texts, there is a stifling of one's voice of the victim. It is the silence, the unwillingness, or the inability to acknowledge the violence, the horror, which leaves victims isolated and thwarts healing. So it's no wonder so many don't speak up, isn't it? To tell each other that we know it exists, to speak of violence against women and against all people, is to challenge violence's right to exist. And we're commanded to break the silence and to give credence to women's stories. Direct your heart to her. Consider, take counsel, and then speak up before there's a society that's filled with violence. More women now than ever are coming forward with stories. We have to listen. We have to listen and try and understand and not tolerate, even in a respectful way as teachers, to say that words matter and we can't continue to diminish. And it's inappropriate to stare and to diminish, to make somebody feel small, to treat a woman as an idol or as an object. When we listen and take stories to heart and we pay attention and to respond, that is our responsibility. It starts with the little comments and the last two things. It's Shabbat. It's a time to rest and regroup and have a sense of sanctuary. It's a time when it's okay to turn off the news. It's okay to take a break until Sunday. It's okay. You're going to hear it all throughout the weekend and next week. It's okay to regroup and find some balance and return to a place of strength. It is okay to try and heal before we enter with some strength the rest of the week and the rest of the world. Shabbat gives us that permission. This tent gives us a permission to say, this really is a sanctuary. It's not just the name of the room. And if you need it, and if you need us, you let us know. We'll direct you to the resources that you need, and if it's spiritual ones, we can help with that. And we want you to check your email for our congregants on that email list, or take a flyer, which is outside, and mark the date for this program that Hadassah and Women of the J and Congregation Har Hashem is co-sponsoring a panel discussion on sexual harassment. We want you to go to this, if you can, to gear up and be present and learn and to bring someone that needs to hear it. Take a look at it. There are flyers outside and it's in your inbox. And we want you to walk in God's ways and stretch the way we always speak of it. So let's try and prevent the chaos that we see in Judges. Frankly, I think it's been there already for a long, long time. But if we understand more, better, if we turn, if we engage in that teshuvah of saying, I don't really get it, how can I be a better ally? And ask the question and then shut up and listen. Well, I think that's a good start.